Innuendo, Book 5 of the Todd Mills Mystery Series. Author R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher Scribble Pub Press, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 8. In the city of lakes, water was never far away. Clutching the dark green plastic bag, the bald man stood on the edge of Lake Harriet, the cool fall water nipping at the soles of his heavy black leather boots. Like the other lakes in the city, this one wasn't so large, just an oval body of water, some 3 miles around. And like the others, it too was surrounded by a parkway of road and paths, both bicycle and pedestrian, as well as huge old homes in a riot of styles, from French Normandy to Prairie School and Italianate. There was a band shell on the slake, though, and a rose garden and a heavily wooded bird sanctuary too. Beautiful in a way, he thought, peering across the dark waters and at the lights on the far side. Yet so quiet, so utterly calm, exactly, which was why he had left here so long ago, much too dull. Though he wasn't a towering man, he was good-sized, with broad, muscular shoulders and massive arms. The first thing that people noticed about him was not his high cheekbones or quick eyes, but his smooth head, which actually wasn't bald, but shaved. In college at the University of Minnesota, he'd been a star football player until he'd been kicked out for selling pot. And then he'd somehow ended up in Los Angeles. There'd been trouble, and then some with the law out there. But then, of course, some 12 years ago, his life had dramatically changed. Until then, he hadn't had a career, yet now he was a professional whose work took him around the world, including back to Minnesota, his home state. Never in his life would he have predicted it, that he'd voluntarily return, if only for a few months. His jeans and leather coat were black like his boots, and he would have blended perfectly into the dark Minneapolis night, except for his head, which glowed like a moon. Wondering if anyone had noticed him, he glanced over his shoulder. And on one path, a woman with a nylon pack mounted on her back went riding quickly by on a bicycle. And there, further down, he saw a guy walking his dog. Yes, he had to be careful. He remembered from his childhood that there was always someone down by these lakes, and that was still the case now. He remembered, too, how surprisingly deep this particular lake was. And he was counting on that. It was the only reason he was here. He twisted his feet so that his black leather boots sank slightly into the sand. Then, clutching the bag in his left hand, bent over and grabbed a rock with his right. So, how do you do this? He hadn't done it in years, not since he left the Midwest. But he did it now, bent low and to the side, brought his arm back, and heaved. The rock shot out over the water, but then abruptly sank with a distinct plunk. Not sure what he'd done wrong, he bent over and fumbled around until he found another one. Holding the rock carefully, he brought his arm back a second time, launched the rock, and watched as it hit the water's surface and dove under without a single skip. Was anyone watching his failed attempts? He looked around, saw no one, and then he reached into the plastic bag and pulled out the long metal object. Not wasting a moment, he bent slightly to his side and threw the heavy knife as hard as he could, watching it whirl far out over the water until it too sliced through the surface and disappeared. Satisfied, he bent to the water and rinsed his hand with a couple of quick swirls. He then reached for one last rock, took it, and hurled it out over the lake. Success was not his. He crumpled the green plastic bag and walked slowly away from the lake, stretching once, and yawning. He crossed the pedestrian path, stuffed the bag into a metal garbage can, and continued on past the bicycle path to his car, which was stopped along the parkway next to a stand of trees and the bird sanctuary. He sat for a few minutes in the white sun as if he were relaxing, but in truth watching to see if anyone who might have seen him come along. But there was no one. Pleased, the large man with the shaved head started up the car and was just about to drive away when his cellular phone started to ring. He immediately knew who it was. Picking it up from the passenger seat, he flicked on the phone and said, "Good evening. This is Vic." "It's me. Did you get it all taken care of?" "Absolutely. Don't worry. It's all under control." "Great. said the voice with an audible sigh. Thanks, a million. No problem. That's what I'm here for. Standing in the woods of the bird sanctuary, the attractive man with the light hair watched as the white Saab pulled away from the curb and sped off into the night. Wearing a rust-colored cotton coat and clutching a camera, he peered suspiciously around a thick oak, saw the red taillights shooting away, and he said to himself, Okay, remember this. Remember this because something important just happened. Did that guy just throw what you think he did into the lake? He'd been there the entire time, hidden by the trees and wondering just what in the hell that other guy, the bald one, was up to. In the faint light from the street lights, he'd taken note of that large, muscular man in the shiny black leather coat. And at first he'd presumed the other had come down here to cruise these woods, like the handful of other men lurking among these trees tonight. But no, the bald man had instead crossed the road and gone straight down to the small beach, and then... Behind him he now heard the snap of a twig, which sounded so jarring in the night shadows. He turned, saw a bush, a tree, and finally eyes. They burned out of the darkness, focused straight on him. The light-haired man stared back, and a moment later a man emerged out of the pool of dark blackness. The other was a medium build, not trim, but not fat either, and he wore a dark suit, white shirt and tie, nice enough looking too, with thick eyebrows and chestnut brown hair and what looked like a heavy beard. His mouth was pinched tight, his face taut, even tense, and he looked almost angry, but of course he was merely hungry. His body famished with lust. The younger one had seen him earlier. Their eyes had caught when he'd first made his way in here. He'd seen the wedding ring, too, some exec, he presumed, who'd probably told his wife he'd be working late tonight. Probably made a couple of $100,000. Had 2 kids, a dog, and while the wife might one day suspect her husband of screwing his secretary, she'd probably never imagine that he was instead down here screwing the boys. Shit, he thought, feeling his heart suddenly tighten. He's just my type, but no, not tonight. Diverting his eyes, he slipped his camera inside his coat and turned away, abandoning any pretext of interest, carefully and purposefully not looking back so as not to encourage the other. The young man moved out of the woods in 2 quick steps, then dashed to the left and hurried off to his car. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.